I want to talk a little bit now about the last phase of the game we haven't covered yet. That would be offense. We talked earlier about Trey Wilson and that he is the real deal, and Napier does a good job in putting him in positions to be successful. But last year, he also had Ricky Pearsall, who was, a real threat on the field. How do we utilize Wilson most effectively now? And who is, that reliable number 2 guy?
Well, this is why I think the transfer from Elijah Badger from Arizona State is such a big deal. Badger doesn't have to be Pearsall. He just has to allow Florida to continue to use Trey Wilson the way they used him last year. So we actually highlighted this in the magazine. One of the features that we have is we've got breakdowns of the film, but you can scan a QR code and it'll take you to a video where you can see the breakdown on the video as well. And what we showed is that Trey Wilson was used as a running back last year with Montrell Johnson as a lead blocker. He was used for screen passes coming out of the backfield. And then really interestingly, they used him in certain ways against South Carolina. And then that whole first drive against Georgia was using the window dressing from the South Carolina game as a decoy for what he was going to do against Georgia. So that whole first drive against Georgia was going against tendency where they'd used him all year. And one of the reasons it's important to keep him on the inside is that it puts the defense in a situation where they have to play nickel or they have to play dime, because if he's back there as a running back and you get him one-on-one on a linebacker, it's death. And so to me, that's the critical component. Like we've talked, like one of the things Napier we thought was going to happen is he was going to have a lot of 2 tight end sets. And it turns out he hasn't had the personnel to do that. Right. But having Trey Wilson back at running back with Montrell Johnson essentially as a fullback, but then being able to like motion out Wilson and now Johnson's the running back. Well, now you've put the defense in a conundrum if they bring too many linebackers in. With the improvements on the offensive line, I expect Montrell Johnson to really benefit from that as well, because you're going to have light defenses in situations where you now can take advantage of the fact that there's essentially a small safety playing outside linebacker, and you'll be able to target him because he had to be in there to guard Trey Wilson because he was in the backfield. So to me, Wilson as a running back is a critical component to what Florida does, more because they're dictating the personnel that the defense has to use than anything he does. And then the fact that he's absolutely special once he gets the ball in his hands, then is obviously an added benefit, and one of the reasons why it's so hard for the defense to sub. But yeah, they used him in a lot of unique ways, especially when you look at what they did in the South Carolina games and the Georgia games last year.
Okay, so I got to tell you, this is the topic that you have seemed the most excited about. And, over the almost hour that we've sat here and talked about all different aspects of this game, you have highlighted the really good portal moves on the offensive line. We've talked about, the running game. We have 2 solid options at quarterback right now. So are you thinking Florida's offense is going to score more points next year?
So I am bullish on their ability to run the ball better. And I think running the ball better is going to make them more effective. I don't know that they're necessarily going to score more. I think what you're going to see is a better ability to control the ball. So when we talked about the middle 8, not giving the ball back to the opposition and getting a field goal at the end of the half is still a win. And then if you come out and you can score a touchdown in the first 4 minutes of the second half, hey, you just went 10-0 in the middle of that segment. I think Napier is not a guy who wants to go out there and chuck the ball around a la Steve Spurrier. He's just not that guy. Sure. And that's okay, but he needs a running game, especially to give Mertz the time that he needs to go downfield. So I'm very bullish on the running game. I'm very bullish on Trey Wilson. I'm encouraged by Elijah Badger being there and the changes they've made on the offensive line. But just like any team in the SEC, they're an injury or 2 away from being too thin. Yeah. And that's where my real concern comes, is if Jake Slaughter goes down, you got Najee Harris at center. Okay. Guy hasn't played any SEC football. If Barber goes down, you still got 2 tackles. But if a guard goes down, what are you going to do? If Badger gets hurt early on in the year, what are you going to do? We saw that a little bit last year with Douglas. Goes down against Kentucky, and there just isn't a third option there at wide receiver, at least not somebody who's an active threat who might be able to draw a double team. So to me, it's the problem that you run into because of recruiting. It's the thinness. But yeah, if you ask me which unit are Florida fans going to be happier with at the end of the year, the offense or the defense, I'm still going to lean towards the offense, especially after what we've seen over the last 4 years.
So, last year, one of the biggest gripes from fans is that they didn't want Coach Napier calling plays anymore. We know he has not relinquished play calling duties. Do you think that's something that improves, or do you think that the play calling really hasn't been that bad? It's the execution.
So if he calls that double reverse that ends up into an intentional grounding again, I might lose my mind. But other than that, the play calling is not anything abnormal for college football. Now, he's not Bobby Petrino. He's not Steve Spurrier. He's not Urban Meyer. He's not gaining some giant advantage with his play calling that some of these other guys do. Why he wants to hold on to it then is maybe a good question, right? Like if you're not truly differentiating there, why are you holding on to it? But I don't think it's necessarily bad. I don't even think it's average. I just think it's a good offense and the structure makes sense. And when they scored 40 points against South Carolina last year, it was the exact same offense that they were running against Utah. Just so happens Utah's defense is a lot better than South Carolina's defense. And I think that's probably what you're going to see this year. The ball is not going to get chucked all over the yard. Mertz isn't that player and Napier isn't that coach, but I do think you're going to see more consistency over the year. Just if for no other reason, because it's Mertz's second year, it's Trey Wilson's second year, and the offensive line should be improved.
I was definitely on the hire an offensive coordinator train, not because I had such huge gripes with the play calling, although I do think that there's just sometimes his feel for the rhythm of the game seems off to me a little bit. But I think my biggest reason for wanting a play caller was that I feel like he wore too many hats. And it's hard to be good at everything with that many hats on. But maybe he solved that problem by hiring Ron Roberts, by hiring Joe Houston, by, giving more responsibility to different aspects. And so maybe, in some ways removed some of those hats and can allow him to kind of, focus a little bit more on the task at hand. But, this is it, right? This year is kind of do or die.
Well, so this is probably the benefit to the schedule for 2024 and 2025 is what I hope we get out of the schedule is certainty. Like 6-6, you're just going to have people on both sides.
Yeah.
Like in some ways, and this will sound weird as a Gator fan, and I really wouldn't want to see this, but I'd rather have 3-9 with a clear path to what needs to be changed versus 6-6 and no one knows.
Yeah.
I'm hoping 9-3 and we're sitting there going, hey, we're on the right path. Right. Sure. But that sort of middle of the road thing where we're going, maybe. And we saw that with Muschamp, right? In 2013, I told the story about Lamar Jackson earlier, that uncertainty around Muschamp, like that's right when he was committing in that 2013, 2014 timeframe. And all of a sudden you've missed out on a guy. Now look, Lamar Jackson was a 3-star guy, not like Lagway, but you've missed out on a guy that you wanted because of that uncertainty. And I mean, Muschamp was a dead man walking probably 3 or 4 games into that 2014 year. Certainly, I think the South Carolina game is the one where it really fell apart. But even before that, the fan base just wasn't behind him. So to me, that's really the thing is yes, this is the year. He's going to have to deliver. And I admire the fact that he's got the stones to say, I'm the offensive coordinator and I'm going to go down with what I believe in.
Betting on himself, right?
Yeah. And look, I mean, when you're making $7 million a year, and we've seen Dan Mullen put out pictures on Twitter of his feet while he's at the beach and all that sort of stuff. He's not living a bad life as he's getting paid to sit there on the beach. So it's not as though this is like a guy making $50,000 a year and his kids won't eat if things don't work out. But look, these guys didn't become head coaches because they're looking to hang out on the beach. They became head coaches because they're ultra competitive maniacs who will, who'd sell their own children if it meant that they could win more football games. And so when you factor it in that way, certainly the fact that he's willing to bet on himself, I think is admirable, but also will be a main point of criticism if things don't improve. So again, I think that sort of goes to what I said earlier about we want to see certainty, or I want to see certainty. I think the Gator Nation wants to see certainty. If you poll them, like, they're willing to give Napier this year. They don't want to give him next year after a mediocre this year. And the problem, I think, is that mediocre this year probably isn't enough to push him out the door. But it's also probably not enough to convince us that we're on the right track, or convince recruits that we're on the right track. And so then you're stuck in this limbo where you're just not good enough to get to where you need to be, and you're not bad enough to get to where you need to be. I think the schedule hopefully causes one of each of those circumstances to be true. Hopefully it's that we're good enough that we know we're in the right path. But even if we're bad enough that we know we're on the right path, there's some certainty in terms of what you're doing.
All right. Well, we're going to be optimistic on this channel and say that it's going to be a 9-3, but Will, I did not mean to keep you for this long. Thank you so much. But tell everybody where they can find the magazine, but then also where they can read you every single week, because especially during the season, I so enjoy waking up in the morning, checking my email, getting, a really good synopsis of what we watched the day before.
Awesome. Thanks, Allie. So you can go to readandreaction.com. There are links to the magazine there. We actually have a digital option, so you can buy a PDF version of the magazine. It's a little bit cheaper than the hard copy. And then you can also go to amazon.com, or if you search Read and Reaction magazine on Google, it'll probably come up. It's like a 2-day delivery time. If you order it on Amazon, they print it out and send it right your way. So, the distribution's been a lot easier than last year when I had them all lined up on my kitchen table and was throwing them in a manila envelope and shipping them out. So Amazon saved me a bunch of time this year, and hopefully it's created a much better product for the people who are out there.
All right. Well, I appreciate it. We're going to have to do this during the season for sure. Fingers crossed for that 9-3 or better. I'm here for that.
I certainly hope so. It makes it a whole lot easier. Like, people always think that we want it to be bad, or we want to be critical. There's nothing better than covering a team that's kicking butt and beating everybody out there. And then we get to explain why we're being successful. That's great. So hopefully that's what we get.
And we're Gators. So that's what we want, right? Like, as fans, we want this team to be successful.
Absolutely. But like you said about special teams, like, sometimes you got to actually say, hey, I'm lost and I need a map and I need to figure out how to get out of here, as opposed to just saying, oh no, it'll be fine. I'll wander around and eventually I'll find my way out. Like, no, let's do it in the right way. Let's look at the flaws and analyze them, and then try to figure out how to fix them. And I think you do a great job of that on your channel, and hopefully we do over at our place too.
You guys absolutely do. All right. Well, thanks for hanging out. I will talk to you soon.
Awesome. Thanks, Allie.
Wanted to give a quick shout out to Mullen Law for their support, not only of the Florida Gators, but our channel as well. Stay tuned for a quick video of theirs before we head out.
After the car accident, your personal life takes a toll when you have major injuries. Being a mother of 3 kids, having to work, it became overwhelming. Didn't know what was going to be my outcome, but Mullen Law actually, they went above and beyond.
At Mullen Law, we're not just your legal team, we're your support system. You do not have to go through this alone. At Mullen Law, we won't back down.